Welcome everyone to ESS2 Module 3 Chapter 12, which is on waste, and today we'll be looking at how human society tend to produce a lot of waste and how this impacts on the environment, with the main question on being how to reduce our environmental impacts of the different waste we're making in regards of our society still growing in terms of population and consumption. So to answer this question, we'll look at 4 points. We first define the different waste we are producing in this planet. Then we'll be speaking in a second point on 3 major production of waste, which is plastic, electronics, and food, and how those waste tend to impact greatly our society, but majorly the environment. On the third point, we'll finally talk about disposal, almost kind of approaching some solution on how we're dealing with our waste. And the fourth point will be more an opening on waste reduction. How, just instead of just disposing of our waste, how could we be able to reduce the production of waste our society is greatly making? So let's talk about the first point now and go into the different kind of waste we are making. Before even speaking about waste, we already talk about environmental science and the planet as an interdisciplinary science and an interconnected systems, where everything tends to be connected together. And that's in fact, this principle tend to be defined and used in these 4 laws of ecology, resumed by Barry Commoner, where everything is connected to everything else. Everything must go somewhere, nature knows best, and nothing comes from nothing. There is nothing brand new in what I'm just reading at this point to you, but this is kind of behind everything that we are making on this planet, we are producing. Every product that is made comes from something, and it will become a waste at some point that at this point we haven't learned how to deal with our waste so much. So we have to use more the idea of recycling, of being able to reuse, being able to give another life to our product, so everything keeps being connected together and not in fact just becoming a waste. And I'm talking to you about waste, but what is waste? Well, of course, first you have this illustration. Waste is information. Why is that? Because if I'm going into a garbage, I have an idea of what you've been eating recently. I have an idea of what the kind of life you're living, if you are someone reading, if you are a video game player, if what kind of maybe clothes you're buying, stuff like that, because in fact everything that we are doing in our life tends to at some point being reflected in our garbage. So a lot in fact of tendency is in fact to look at waste and being able to look at our consumption. But before above all of that, waste is in fact a human product. In nature, waste doesn't really exist because it's always recycled. Waste will be a nutrient that will be reused at the base of the food chain, for example. In general, because it's human construct, it means that we haven't thought carefully and clearly on how we have to make our product. So it's in fact an issue coming from a poor product design, and we talked about product just a few days ago. The problem of a waste, it can also be seen as a resources in the wrong place. It means that we are extracting different resources, placing them together, and after we don't know how to split them and make use of them again. Which comes to a fourth point, which is a non-product output, meaning that this waste usually is useless to our society. We don't know what to do with it, so we're just throwing it in a place that we hope to not see anymore. So before even going into category of waste, let's look at some example of how cities or countries deal with waste, with the best and the worst example on this planet at this point. Starting with the positive side, one of the best examples is Sweden. Sweden tends to have just 1% and even less of all the trash they are producing going up into the landfills. How did they make that possible? Well, they've been able to promote extraordinarily recycling, reusing, and also reducing the most possible the waste by educating the people. Also on the side, there's some, of course, discussion, but they are burning part of the trash to produce electricity, because part of the waste can be used as a combustible, And we've seen how energy tend to be produced from combustion. So it has been used in Sweden to generate electricity, and so Sweden tend to be like one of the top examples for most of the country to turn into in terms of management of waste. At the contrary, if you make a comparison in the US, we are throwing 70% of our waste into the landfill. So we definitely need to make a lot of progress. Other comparison with our city of Mumbai tend to produce 11,000 tons of trash every day for a population that is 18.4 million people. That's just insanely crazy. City of Cairo in Egypt, 19.5 million people living there, use part of their trash to feed the pigs, in fact. That's a way they found to reduce the waste accumulation. And a point for China, and that's also a dangerous point, when we know that population of China is still increasing, even though they're coming into a threshold in the next future, but the waste tend to increase as twice as fast as the population because they got more and more access to consumption. But overall, one of the worst examples to cite in this page is in fact New York. It's one of the world's most wasteful cities. Not an example to follow, only 8 million people if I compare to the previous one. It's a city using the most energy on the planet with the comparison of one oil supertanker every 1.5 days. Has a lot of trash being accumulated, about 33 million tons per year. I let you make the calculation and compare it with Mumbai if you'd like to. And also we talk about water, well, that's a city that uses most water. So definitely not a correct example in comparison to the previous one, Sweden, that we were talking about. So let's talk about waste and the different sources of waste illustrated in this page. So we have in fact 5 major sources of waste. We have the municipal solid waste or individual residences waste. So in fact that's our common everyday life waste. Then we have factories, power plants, commercial enterprise and institutions. So I just summarize them slightly differently for the rest of this video. We'll go first looking at the municipal solid waste, so individual residences, the one that we're making. Then we'll be looking at medical waste. Then after hazardous waste, industrial waste, and finally construction and demolition waste. Okay? So that's slightly different ways to categorize them. So let's look at our first one, our everyday life waste, that in fact we usually tend to call garbage or trash. In majority, the different kind of stuff we're throwing tend to be organic. A lot of food usually tend to be thrown, either used or not. We are throwing paper, a lot of plastic, glass, metal, for example. That's usually coming a lot from the food consumption indirectly. What we can see is, and not a big surprise, as higher the wealthiness of the people is, the wealthier the people are, the more trash they are throwing away. That's what we can see with this graph right here. Low incomes tend to throw about a third only of what high income tend to be throwing away as trash. And also interestingly, depending on the social class rank, the type of waste is also different. If we look in general, the low income people tend to throw more organic stuff related to food. As you go to a higher social rank, social level, you can see a decrease, and a pretty drastic decrease once you're reaching the high level of organic waste. And instead, papers and other than glass tend to increase. Also metal, meaning that in fact people tend to have access to more expensive product, and those are getting rid of at some point and going to the trash. So what we can see is, in general, low incomes will tend to produce less solid waste. Organic waste can be recycled in some way, that it can be compost, it can be sent back to nutrients, and so it's easily handled, when solid waste is a harder task to handle. So let's look at the next category with the medical waste, and I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but with this graph we have an illustration of the different waste being thrown for medical activity, going from sharp stuff, biohazards, some stuff related to chemo, and other pharmaceutical and radioactive stuff. So in general, those wastes tend to be handled very carefully because they all tend to be either dangerous for human or for the environment. Speaking about hazardous waste, the majority of all stuff being hazardous comes mostly from industry, where we have mostly 5 industrial sectors producing 94% of all hazardous waste. And you have these 5 industrial sectors being mentioned here. I won't be asking you to remember them, but just to have a clear idea, the majority is in fact coming from chemical factories. Then after the energy factory, petroleum and coal, who are making our energy, producing about a big third of it. Then after metal, you can see metal factory, waste, and pesticides and agricultural activity as kind of the 5th one. Of course, because this waste coming from factories for industry, you expect the biggest part of this waste being produced in a wealthy country, and that's in fact what happened. Those wealthy countries are also emitting another source of waste related to nuclear energy, because we've seen that only wealthy countries tend to produce nuclear energy here in the States by about 20% of its contribution. Nuclear energy tends to be very clean because it doesn't emit CO2 directly. However, the waste is a big issue because we don't know how to handle the waste in itself. Those products that are radioactive, of course you don't want to touch it, you don't want to be around it, and they will be radioactive for longer than human life. Some will go over thousands and thousands of years, possibly sometimes hundreds of millennia. And so ways to handle those wastes are several, but none of them are like very convenient and long-term effective. Some sites decided to create those kind of deep pool and just place the tank containing those radioactive waste into those pools to avoid any radiation and leak of possible radioactive material. Other sites tend just to store all of this container in a place far away from any cities and people living around. Other places, such as in the Yucca Mountain, are trying to dig and place those tanks within, for example, abandoned mine or just specific tunnels that have been created for them for long-term storage, thinking that hopefully in underground there is less risk than on the surface. But those radioactive elements, if they leak, they can go and contaminate underground water, for example. They can go through little by little the ground and could reach the surface too. A site such as the Yucca Mountain, in fact, has been the site of Yucca Mountain is not used anymore since 2009 because there was a lot of manifestation and protestation of localities going against it. So they had to close this storage. And in fact, there is a lot of controversy regarding nuclear energy production because of the future of waste storage. Let's go back now into our list and finishing up with the last two one. So number 4 is industrial waste, which represent the majority of the waste created by our society. 3/4 of the waste created by our society is industrial. As you can see, our daily waste by municipal solid waste represent only about 2-3%. And beside municipal solid waste, we can see also counting for 3.5% the construction and demolition waste, which in fact are leftovers for any building being demolished at this point. The problem of those type of waste is that they tend to be very large, very difficult to handle, very difficult to disassemble, because as you can see from this slight animation, when you're demolishing a building, everything is destroyed at the same time. You may have some company that will be helping on recycling, on separating the stuff, but that's of course a cost effect to deal with. So at this point, we'll just take a quick break, and whenever you're ready, just go to point 2, in which we'll talk about the three major, at least what I consider for this class, the three major waste our society is dealing with, which is plastic, food, and electronic waste. So take a break, and whenever you're ready, just start the next video. Which are leftovers